Homeless trespasser, public nuisance. The officer labeled him without a glance. Nobody asked his name. Nobody cared why he sought shelter from the freezing winter cold. They mocked his faded military jacket as he stood silently before the judge. Then she opened his file and froze. Her hands trembled as she read further. You evacuated Saigon in 1975? He simply nodded. The entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. Richard Cole was a 69-year-old veteran who had participated in the Saigon evacuation of 1975. The mission had left him with a permanent spinal injury that gradually worsened over the decades following his service. His medical records documented chronic pain that made consistent employment impossible as he aged. After years of unemployment and mounting medical bills, Richard had lost his modest apartment. With no family to turn to, he began living in parks around the city, carrying his few remaining possessions in a weathered backpack that never left his side. On a particularly bitter winter night, when temperatures dropped dangerously below freezing, Richard had sought shelter in the recessed doorway of a downtown bank. The small overhang offered minimal protection from the wind and snow, but it was better than nothing for a man whose military-damaged spine ached deeply in the cold. The bank's security guard spotted him around midnight and immediately called police, reporting an unauthorized person trespassing on private property. When officers arrived, Richard offered no resistance. He simply clutched his old backpack tightly, protecting the few treasures inside: a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and a framed photograph of himself in a helmet, standing with his unit in Vietnam. At the police station, no one asked about his circumstances or history. An intake officer simply recorded the charge, trespassing homeless individual, before directing him to a holding cell for the weekend. 3 days later, Richard appeared for his court hearing. He wore his old military jacket, not as a plea for sympathy, but because it was the only clean clothing he owned. The jacket hung loosely on his thin frame, its patches faded but still recognizable to those who knew what they represented. As he entered the courtroom, whispers rippled through the gallery. Another social burden. Probably chose to be homeless. These people are everywhere now. Richard stood silently, gripping his backpack strap with gnarled fingers, his gaze fixed on the floor. His shoulders, once squared proudly in military formation, now curved forward in surrender to life's long battle. Judge Eleanor Marshall, known for her efficiency in processing minor offenses, picked up his file with the same detached professionalism she'd exhibited for 20 years on the bench. Her initial expression revealed nothing but the routine weariness of seeing yet another case of urban vagrancy. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Richard's weathered face as he waited for judgment, unaware that his life was about to change when the judge would discover exactly who stood before her. The prosecutor read the charges in a monotone voice. Defendant Richard Cole, charged with illegal trespassing and disturbing public order. Richard bowed his head in silence, offering no defense. A hurriedly appointed public defender made a perfunctory plea. Your Honor, my client is homeless and had no criminal intent. He was merely seeking shelter from life-threatening weather conditions. The temperature that night dropped below 15 degrees. Several people in the courtroom snickered dismissively, their comfortable lives having never exposed them to such desperate circumstances. A well-dressed woman in the gallery whispered audibly to her companion, "There are shelters for people like him." Her companion nodded in agreement, both unaware that the local shelters had been filled to capacity that night, turning away dozens in need. Judge Eleanor maintained her stern expression. Does the defendant wish to make a statement before sentencing? Richard looked up, his cloudy eyes reflecting decades of unspoken pain. I just needed somewhere out of the wind that night. My back, the cold makes it worse. The pain sometimes becomes unbearable when temperatures drop. A soft sigh echoed from somewhere in the back of the courtroom, but it quickly dissolved into the cold formality of the proceedings. An elderly gentleman in the last row shifted uncomfortably, recognizing something in Richard's posture that spoke of military service, but remained silent. Judge Eleanor opened her case file further, scanning the background section more thoroughly this time. Her eyes narrowed as she read entries that had been overlooked during initial processing. Participated in Operation Frequent Wind, Saigon evacuation. Purple Heart recipient for injuries sustained in combat. Bronze Star for valor after rescuing 18 personnel during the 1975 base fire at Camp Eagle. Her hand visibly trembled as the significance of these honors registered. These weren't minor commendations. They represented extraordinary service and sacrifice. She looked up at the man before her, her expression shifting perceptibly. "You served during the Saigon evacuation?" Richard simply nodded, the movement barely noticeable, as though even this acknowledgement of his service felt uncomfortable to him now. For several suspended seconds, the courtroom fell into complete silence. Even the usual shuffling of papers ceased. The tattered man standing before them, the one they had so quickly judged and dismissed, had once traded his health and future so they could sit safely in this courtroom. While they had built careers and families, he had suffered silently with injuries sustained protecting others in one of history's most chaotic military evacuations. The public defender, noticing the change in atmosphere, leaned forward with sudden interest. The prosecutor's papers stopped shuffling. Even the bailiff's posture straightened instinctively as the military connection registered. Judge Eleanor studied Richard's face more carefully now, seeing beyond the weathered exterior to glimpse the young soldier who had once run into danger while others fled. She noted the dignity in his stance despite everything life had taken from him. The realization hung heavy in the air. How many quiet heroes walked among them, unrecognized and forgotten? How many men and women who had given everything now lived on the margins of the very society they had protected? How many invisible veterans sleep on our streets tonight, still carrying the weight of their service, while we pass by without a second glance? If you believe these silent heroes deserve more respect than anyone else, type respect to honor those who gave everything but asked for nothing in return. Judge Eleanor struggled to maintain her professional composure, but her voice had noticeably softened. Defendant Richard Cole, on behalf of this court, I apologize for the delay in recognizing who you are and what you've sacrificed for our country and its citizens. She immediately dismissed all charges against him with a decisive strike of her gavel that echoed through the suddenly attentive courtroom. As a judge, I have a small discretionary privilege I rarely exercise in my capacity on this bench. She reached beneath her bench and withdrew a medallion that caught the light as she held it up. This is the city's Honorary Citizen Award, reserved for those exceptional individuals who have demonstrated extraordinary self-sacrifice in service to others. In my 15 years as judge, I have never found anyone more deserving than you, Mr. Cole. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Several people rose to their feet, including the court reporter whose own father had served in Vietnam and never returned home. The elderly gentleman in the back wiped tears from his eyes, his own Korean War service suddenly feeling acknowledged. The public defender approached the bench, clearly emotional. Your Honor, I volunteer to represent Mr. Cole pro bono for any legal needs he might have going forward. It would be my privilege and honor to assist him in navigating the Veterans Benefits System. The bank security guard, the same one who had called the police that freezing night, quietly approached Richard in the hallway afterward, head bowed in genuine remorse, his voice barely audible. Sir, if I had known about your service, I'm deeply sorry for my actions. My own brother served 2 tours in Desert Storm. I should have asked about your circumstances first instead of immediately calling authorities. Word spread quickly through the local veterans community networks. By mid-afternoon, representatives from 3 veterans support organizations arrived at the courthouse, each determined to offer meaningful assistance. Mr. Cole, we currently have a vacant apartment in our transitional housing program specifically designated for distinguished veterans facing difficult circumstances. It's modest but clean, with utilities included, and completely yours for as long as you need it. We consider it our privilege to serve those who have served us all. When Richard entered the small apartment later that day, his trembling hands gently touched the freshly painted white walls, the simple but comfortable furniture, the neatly made bed with clean sheets. For the first time in almost 20 years, he whispered with visible emotion, I have somewhere to call home. The story might have ended there, one wrong quietly made right, but a local journalist covering the court that day had been deeply moved. Her feature article about Richard's story appeared prominently in the weekend edition. By Monday, donations had flooded the Veterans Organization. Multiple job offers arrived for positions that could accommodate Richard's physical limitations. A specialized medical clinic offered free comprehensive treatment for his service-related injuries. A community that had been walking past him for years suddenly saw him. At a small gathering organized to thank those who had helped transform his circumstances, a television reporter respectfully asked, "Mr. Cole, if you could tell the world one thing from your experiences, what would that message be?" Richard smiled gently, his eyes brightening with unexpected hope. "Don't judge someone's worth until you've heard their story. Every person you pass has a history you know nothing about." In the park where Richard had once slept, the city installed a small memorial plaque. This place was once temporary shelter to a quiet hero among us. Beside it stood a new bench, inscribed with the words, "Respect comes not from the clothes you wear, but from the heart you've given away." Each week, without fail, Richard volunteered at the local library, reading adventure stories to wide-eyed neighborhood children who came to adore their sergeant storyteller. He never needed anyone to call him a hero, only to remember that he had existed and served with honor. The case became required reading for law students at the state university. More importantly, it became a touchstone for how communities began to view their homeless populations as individuals with stories yet untold, potential yet untapped. Richard's military jacket, once his only protection against bitter winter nights, was respectfully framed and displayed in the courthouse lobby. Below it, a simple reminder: listen before you judge. Every year on Veterans Day, Richard received dozens of handwritten letters from people whose perspectives had been forever changed by his story of service and quiet dignity. Some values never fade with time or circumstance. Courage and human dignity remain foremost among them. If you believe everyone deserves at least one chance to be recognized for who they truly are, subscribe to TT Hero Stories. TT Hero Stories, because some heroes never stop serving.